This story is about Samuel, David, and Saul. The introduction. After the Israelites conquered Canaan, its land was divided among the 12 tribes, and the people of Israel settled down and became farmers and shepherds. Each of the 12 tribes of Israel ruled its own small part of the land. The tribes ruled separately and only met together once a year to pray at the shrine in Shiloh. Since the tribes of Israel did not act together as a united nation, they did not have a common army, even though they were surrounded by powerful enemies like the Philistines. Fighting separately, the tribes were no match for the fierce Philistines. The story of the long wars of Israelites fought against the Philistines and their efforts to unite against their common enemy is told in the 2 books of Samuel. The Philistines first attacked the Israelites around the year 1050 BC. They swooped down in fast chariots made of iron, and they carried terrible weapons. The Israelites fought bravely, but were overpowered by savage Philistines. The Philistines destroyed the great shrine at Shiloh, where the Israelites worshipped God. They killed the priest and stole the Ark of the Covenant. The Philistines took over the land and dominated the Israelites. The people of Israel cried to God for help during this dark time. God hearing their prayer, God helped them. God helped all the children of Israel by helping this sad, childless woman named Hannah. He gave Hannah a son, Samuel, who he chose to lead and serve the people of Israel. Samuel was a man of God, and he did what the Lord wanted him to do. The people asked the prophet Samuel to choose a king to lead them, even though all the nations around Israel had kings. Israel had never before had a king. It was a new idea for Israel to have a king, but the rulers of the 12 tribes knew that their people had to fight as one nation if they were to defeat the Philistines, and they needed a king to unite them. Samuel was not sure whether he should grant the people's request. He knew that Israel had never had a king because the people believed that God ruled the land. They had not needed a king because God was their friend and protector. Samuel was afraid that God would be angered by the people's wish to have a king. He was worried that God would feel that the people did not trust him. Samuel was so worried that if the people had a king, soon they would begin thinking that they did not need God anymore. So Samuel looked to God for guidance, and God granted the people their wish. He told Samuel to anoint the young man Saul as king of the Israelites. The people followed Saul not because he was a great warrior or powerful, but because they believed that God was with him. The people believed that when a man was anointed, God gave him special power. Saul had to defend Israel against the powerful armies of the Philistines. He was a good and brave soldier, and his troops loved him. He began to push the Philistines out of Israel, just as Samuel had feared. However, Saul soon became very proud and disobeyed God. Saul thought that he could rule the nation of Israel by himself. Samuel became very angry with Saul, and he left him. Saul soon discovered that leading the fight against the Philistines was a very hard task, too difficult to do alone. He was overcome with sadness and loneliness. He began to distrust the people close to him, thinking that everyone wanted to kill him. The Philistines defeated Saul's army at the Battle of Gilboa. When Saul saw what happened to his army, he killed himself. When Saul saw what had happened to his army, he killed himself in despair, and the Philistines captured his body and showed it to all the Israelites to frighten them. The Philistines once again controlled the Israelites. It seemed as though the Israelites would never be free. Yet God did not abandon his people. He chose David to be the king of Israel. David was a poor shepherd boy from the town of Bethlehem. The Bible tells us that when Saul was fighting against the Philistines, David came to do battle with the giant Philistine warrior Goliath. David was a young boy when he fought Goliath. Saul's soldiers laughed at him when he told them he wanted to fight the giant. They told him that he was just a boy, but David showed them how brave he was. He went out alone and killed Goliath and saved his Israelite army. David was the greatest king of ancient Israel. At first, David ruled only the southern part of Israel, which was called Judea. After Saul's death, he united all the tribes into one great nation and became king of both the north and the south of Israel. David led the Israelites against the Philistines. His army crushed the Philistines in a terrible battle near Jerusalem. The Philistines promised to obey David from that time on, and they never troubled Israel again. David turned Israel into an empire as great as Egypt's. He defeated all of Israel's enemies and captured their land. Under the leadership of King David, Israel became one of the greatest powers of the world. David governed his empire from his court in Jerusalem. He captured the city from the Canaanites, and he made it his capital since it was located near the center of Israel. Jerusalem was built on two high hills so that it was easy to defend against the enemies. It had a good water supply. Today, the beautiful city of Jerusalem is still a special place for the Jews, Christians, and Muslims. The children of Israel loved King David because he was a man of God. The people believed that the Lord's Spirit rested on David. They said that God helped David in everything he did. Most of the time, he obeyed God's wishes. However, David was not always a kind and gentle king. David reminded the people that they should worship God and be grateful to him. David brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, and he set up Israel's shrine, which had been destroyed by the Philistines, in his capital city. On the day when the Ark was brought into the city, David and the Israelites danced for joy in the streets. They believed that God too now ruled from Jerusalem. When David became king of Israel, his people were still dominated by the Philistines. But by the time David died, Israel had become a great empire. Israel was still bound by the promise that Moses and his people had made to God at Sinai. God would help Israel and protect it only if the people kept his law. He wanted Israel to be a special nation and to show all other nations of the world how men and women should live in obedience to God. This was Israel's greatest challenge as the nation of Israel became stronger and stronger. Would the people always remember God and keep his commandments? Throughout the stories in the books of Samuel, God takes poor and humble men and women, such as Hannah, Saul, and David, and make them part of his plan for Israel. Jews and Christians believe that even today, God asks men and women, boys and girls, to help him with his plans for the world. From the books of 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel. Once there was a woman named Hannah who was bitter in her soul because she had no sons or daughters. She prayed to the Lord and wept sadly, and she vowed a vow, "O Lord of hosts, if you will look down upon the sadness of your handmaiden and remember me, and will give to your handmaiden a man-child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razors shall touch his head." It came to pass in due time that Hannah bore a son. She called him Samuel, because she said, "I asked him of the Lord." Her husband Elkanah and all his household went up to offer the Lord of the yearly sacrifice. But Hannah did not go, for she said to her husband, I will not go up until the child is weaned, and I will take him so that he may appear before the Lord and stay there forever. Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him. Only keep your word to the Lord. So the woman stayed home and nursed her son until he was old enough to wean. When she had weaned him, she took him up with her, with a young bull of 3 years, and 1 measure of flour and bottle of wine. She brought him to the house of the Lord in Shiloh, when the child was very young. And so the young bull was slain, and the child was brought to Eli the priest. And Hannah said, O my Lord, I am the woman who stood in the temple here, praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has given me what I asked of him. Therefore I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he shall be lent to the Lord. Then they worshipped the Lord there. And when Elkanah and his household went home, Samuel stayed and was taught by Eli the priest. Each year, Samuel's mother made him a little goat and brought it to him when she came up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. And the child Samuel grew and was in favor with both the Lord and men, and he ministered to the Lord before Eli. Eli's eyes began to grow dim, so that he could not see. Once when Eli was lying down in his place before the lamp of God was put out in the temple, where the ark of the Lord was kept, and before Samuel had laid down to sleep, God called Samuel. He answered, Here I am. And Samuel ran to Eli and said, Here I am, you called me. Eli said, I did not call, lie down and sleep. He went and lay down. Again God called, Samuel. Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. And Eli answered, I did not call, my son, lie down again. Now Samuel did not yet recognize the Lord, nor had the voice of the Lord been made known to him. The Lord called Samuel again the 3rd time, and he arose and went to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. Then Eli understood that the Lord had called the child. So Eli said to Samuel, Go and lie down. If he calls you, you are to say, Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. So Samuel went and lay down in his place, and God came and stood there and called, as at the other times, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel answered, Speak, for your servant is listening. And then God said to Samuel, Behold, I am going to do something in Israel, at which the ears of everyone who hears it shall tingle. On an appointed day I will perform against Eli all the things I have spoken of concerning his household. Eli's sons were very wicked, and when I begin, I shall finish it. For I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the wickedness of which he knows, because his sons became evil, and he did not restrain them. Therefore I have sworn to the house of Eli that their wickedness shall not be cleansed with sacrifices nor offerings forever. Samuel lay until morning. Then he opened the doors of the house of the Lord, but he feared to tell Eli of the vision. Then Eli called Samuel and said, Samuel, my son. And he answered, Here I am. And Eli said, What was it that the Lord said to you? I beg you not to hide it from me. May God punish you, and more, if you hide anything from me of the things he said to you. So Samuel told him everything. and he did not hide anything from him. Eli said, "It is the Lord. Let him do whatever seems good to him." Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him. All Israel from Dan to Beersheba knew that Samuel was to be a prophet of the Lord. Now Israel went out to battle against the Philistines. After a bloody day's reverses, the elders of Israel said, "Why has the Lord struck us today before the Philistines? Let us fetch the ark of the covenant of the Lord from Shiloh, so that when it comes among us, it may save us from the hand of our enemies." So the people sent to Shiloh, and when the ark of the covenant of Israel So when the people went to Shiloh, and when the ark of the covenant of the Lord came up to the camp, all Israel shouted with a great joy, so that the earth rang out. And when the Philistines heard the noise of the shout, they said, "What does this mean? The noise of this great shout in the camp of the Hebrews." They learned that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp, and they were afraid, for they said, "God has come into the camp. Woe unto us! This is the God that struck the Egyptians with all the plagues in the wilderness." But their leaders said, "Be strong and act like men, O Philistines, so that you do not become servants to the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Quit yourselves like men and fight." And the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated. There was a great slaughter. 30,000 of Israel's footmen fell, and the ark of God was taken. Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. He went from year to year on circuit to Bethel and Gilgal and Mizpah, and judged Israel in all these places. But his home was in Ramah, and there he judged Israel and built an altar unto the Lord. When Samuel was old, he made his sons Joel and Abiah judges over Israel. But they did not walk in his ways, for they took bribes and delivered false judgments. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together, and came to Samuel in Ramah, and said to him, "Behold, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Give us a king to judge us, like all the other nations." Their words displeased Samuel. He prayed to the Lord God, and God answered, saying, "Listen to the voice of all the people, for it is not you that they have rejected, but me, and I may not reign over them. They have forsaken me, and served false gods, ever since the day that I had brought them out of Egypt. Even so do they unto you. So listen to their voice. Nevertheless, make a solemn protest. Show them what kind of king is going to reign over them." So Samuel told the people what God said to them. And he said, "This is the kind of king who will reign over you. He will take your sons to be his charioteers and his horsemen, and to run before his chariots, to till his ground and reap his harvest, and to manufacture his weapons and his chariots. He will take your daughters to be his cooks and bakers. Your fields will he take, and your best vineyards and olive groves, and give them to his servants. And he will take 1/10 part of your grain and of your vintage, and give it to his officers and his servants. He will take your men servants and your maid servants, your best young men and your donkeys, and put them to work for him. You will complain and mourn because of this king whom you have chosen, but the Lord will not listen to you." However, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel. They said, "No, we want a king like all the other nations." a king to judge us and to fight battles." Samuel listened and repeated what they had said to the Lord, and God said to him, "Give them their way and find them a king." So Israel said to the men of Israel, "All of you, go back to your own city." Now there was a Benjamite called Kish, a man of power and standing, and he had a son whose name was Saul. Saul was the most handsome man of Israel, and he stood head and shoulders above all the others. Kish had lost some of his donkeys, so he said to the son of Saul, "Take one of the servants with you and go and look for my donkeys." So Saul traveled across the Mount Ephraim and through the land of Shiloh, in the land of Shiam, in the land of the Benjamites, but he found no trace of his father's donkeys. And when they came to the land of Zuph, Saul said to his servant, "Come, let us go home." For my father will cease to think about his donkeys and begin to wonder about our own fate. But in this city there was a man of God, and he is an honorable man. Let us go see him, and perhaps he can show us which path to follow. Only if we do consult with him, what shall we bring as a present? For we have nothing that is fit for the man of God." Saul's servant said, "See, I have a fourth part of a shekel of silver. We can give that to the man of God, and he will tell us which way to go." They went into the city, and the maidens at the well told them that Samuel was going to bless the sacrifice that day on the high place. So they went on to the high place and met Samuel on his way there. The Lord had warned Samuel the day before that a Benjamite was coming to meet him, and that this was the man whom he should anoint king of Israel. When Samuel saw Saul, the Lord said, "Here is the man of whom I spoke, the one who shall reign over my people." So Samuel spoke to Saul and told him to set his mind no longer upon the lost donkeys, for they have been found. He said, "To whom does your Israel look? Is it not to you and to all your father's house?" Saul said, "I am a Benjamite, a member of the smallest of all the tribes of Israel, and my family is the least important in the tribe of Benjamin. Why do you speak to me in this manner?" Samuel took Saul and his servant and brought them into the parlor and made them sit at the head of the table, above all the other guests, of whom there were about 30. Samuel told the cook to serve Saul with a special portion of meat, which had been reserved for the guest of honor. And the next day Samuel took a vial of oil and poured it upon Saul's head, kissed him, and said, "It is not because the Lord has anointed you to be captain of his people." Saul went back to his own country, and the Spirit of God came upon him, and he prophesied, so that those who knew him before were amazed and said, "What has happened to the son of Kish? Is Saul also one of the prophets?" Saul told his family that he had met a man of God who had told him that the lost donkeys were found. But in telling him, he made no mention of his anointing or of the kingdom. Now Samuel called the people together at Mizpah and said to them, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, I brought Israel out of Egypt and delivered you out of the land of the Egyptians and out of the hand of all the kingdoms and those that oppressed you. But you have this day rejected your God, who himself saved you from your adversaries and your tribulations. And you have said to him, Nay, but set a king over us. Now therefore present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and by your thousands." And when Samuel had caused all the tribes of Israel to come near, the tribe of Benjamin was indicated by lot. When he had caused the tribe of Benjamin to come near by families, the family of Mizrah was indicated, and Saul, the son of Kish, was indicated. But when they sought him, he could not at first be found. And when they found him, he was among the baggage. He was brought into the crowd, and when he stood among them, he was higher than any of them, from his shoulders upward. And Samuel said, "Look, there is a man whom the Lord has chosen, and there is nobody like him among all the people." And all the people shouted and said, "God save the king." Saul became a great king and a mighty man of valor, and he led the children of Israel into many battles against their enemies, the Philistines. But after a while he disobeyed the laws of the Lord. Samuel warned him, saying, "You have been very foolish in not keeping the commandment of the Lord your God, for if you had done so, the Lord would have established your kingdom upon Israel forever. And now your kingdom will not continue." Saul had a son named Jonathan, and it came to pass one day, in the course of a battle, that Saul said to the people, "Cursed be the man that eats any food until evening, so that I may be avenged of my enemies." So none of the people tasted any food. And all they of the land came to wood, and there was honey on the ground. But no man put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the curse. Jonathan did not hear when his father charged the people with the oath. Therefore he put the end of the rod that was in his hand and dipped it into a honeycomb, and put his hand to his mouth. Then one of the people said, "Your father ordered the people with an oath, saying, 'Cursed be the man that eats any food this day.' But Jonathan said, 'My father has troubled the land.'" After a battle with the Philistines, Saul said, "Let us go down after them again by night and fight them until the morning light, and let us not leave a man alive among them." Saul asked counsel of God, "Shall I go down after the Philistines? Will you deliver them into the hand of Israel?" The Lord did not answer him that day. So Saul said, "Draw together all chiefs of the people, and let us see what sin has been done this day. For the Lord lives that saves Israel. Even if the sin be Jonathan my son's, he shall surely die." Therefore odds were chosen, first between Saul and Jonathan on one side, and the people on the other, and then between Saul and Jonathan was indicated. Then Saul said to Jonathan, "Tell me what you have done." And Jonathan told him, "I did but taste a little honey with the end of the rod that's in my hand, and lo, I must die." And Saul answered, "You shall surely die, Jonathan." Then the people said to Saul, "Shall Jonathan die, who has wrought this great salvation in Israel? God forbid. As the Lord lives, there shall not one hair of his head fall to the ground, for he has worked with God this day." So the people rescued Jonathan, and he did not die. Then Saul went up from following the Philistines, and the Philistines went to their own place. Samuel said to Saul, "The Lord sent me to anoint you to be king over his people, over Israel. Now, therefore, listen to the voice of the words of the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I remember what Amalek did to Israel. how he laid in wait for him on the road when he came from Egypt. Now go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and do not spare them, but slay both man and woman, child and baby, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. Saul struck the Amalekites from Havilah Shar, near Egypt. He took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared the best of the sheep, and of the oxen, and of the fatlings, and the lambs, and all that was good, and would not destroy them. But everything that was vile they destroyed utterly. Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel, saying, I regret that I have set up Saul to be king, for he has turned back from following me, and has not performed my commandments. And it grieved Samuel, and he cried to the Lord all night. And Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said to him, Blessed be you, for all the Lord, I have performed the commandment of the Lord. Samuel said, What means then this bleating of sheep, and the lowing of oxen, which I hear? And Saul said, They have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, and the rest we have destroyed. And Samuel said to Saul, The Lord sent you on a journey, and said, Go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites. Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? As the Lord has a great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, in obeying the voice of the Lord. Behold, to obey is better than to sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. For the rebellion is like the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is like iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. Saul said, I have sinned, for I have disobeyed the commandments of the Lord, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. Nevertheless, pardon my sin, I pray you, and come back with me, so that I may worship the Lord. But Samuel answered, I will not go back with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. Samuel turned to go away, but Saul took hold of the skirt of his mantle, and the skirt tore. Samuel said to him, The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today, and has given it to a neighbor of yours who was better than you. The strength of Israel would not lie or repent, for he is not a man if he must repent. Saul said, I have done wrong, but I pray you to honor me now before the elders of my people and before Israel, and go back with me, that I may worship the Lord your God. Samuel relented and went back with Saul, and Saul worshipped the Lord. Then Samuel returned to Ramah, and Saul went to his house. As long as he lived, Samuel never saw Saul again, but he mourned for him, and the Lord regretted that he made Saul king over Israel. The Lord God said to Samuel, How long will you mourn for Saul, saying, I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse of Bethlehem, for I have chosen a king from among his sons. Samuel did as the Lord told him, and came to Bethlehem. The elders of the town trembled at his coming, and said, Do you come peaceably? Peaceably he said, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Make yourselves ready and come with me to the sacrifice. He blessed Jesse and his sons and called them to the sacrifice. When they came, he looked at Eliab and said, Surely the Lord chosen one is before him now. When he came, he looked at Eliab and said, Surely the Lord's chosen one is before him now. But God answered, saying, Do not look at his face or the height of him, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel. But Samuel said, The Lord has not chosen this one either. Then Jesse made Shammah pass by Samuel and said, Neither has the Lord chosen this one. One after the other, Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. And Samuel said to Jesse, The Lord has not chosen these. Then he asked, Are all your children here? And Jesse said, There is still the youngest, David. He is keeping the sheep. David said to Jesse, Send and fetch him here, for we will not sit down until he comes. David was sent for, and soon appeared. He was a fine, healthy boy, and handsome. Then God said to Samuel, Arise, anoint him, for this is he. Then Samuel took the horn of the oil, and anointed David in the midst of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord was with David from that day on. And the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit troubled him. And then Saul's servants said to him, You see, an evil spirit from God is sent to trouble you. Now if you will command your servants who are here before you to find a man who is a cunning player on the harp, then when the evil spirit comes from God, he will play upon the strings, and you will be well. Find me a man who can play well, said Saul to his servants, and bring him to me. Then one of the servants answered and said, I have seen a son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, who is clever at playing, an exceedingly courageous man, a man of war, prudent in all things, a handsome person, and the Lord is with him. Therefore Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, Send me your son David, who is tending the sheep. Jesse took a donkey loaded with food, and a bottle of wine, and a kid, and sent them by David, his son, to Saul. And David came to Saul, and stood before him, and served him. Saul loved David very much, and he was made the king's armor-bearer. Then Saul sent word to Jesse, saying, Let David stay with me, for he pleases me very much. And it was true that when the evil spirit from God came upon Saul, David took a harp and played upon the strings. And Saul was refreshed and felt well again. The evil spirit departed from him at the sound of the music. Now the Philistines gathered their forces for battle. They gathered Shechem, and they camped in this dam. Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together and camped in the valley of Elah, lined up in battle array against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them. Out from the camp of the Philistines came a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 9 feet and 9 inches, and had a helmet of brass upon his head. And he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekel of brass. He had plates of brass upon his legs, and a shield of brass between his shoulders. The staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. A shield-bearer walked before him. Goliath stood and cried out to the armies of Israel, "Why have you come out to set up your armies in battle array? I am not a Philistine, and you servants of Saul. Choose a man to represent you, and let him come down to me. If he can fight me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I win over him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And he added, "I defy the armies of Israel this day. Send me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all the Israelites heard those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and very much frightened. And every morning and evening for 40 days the Philistine drew near and challenged the Israelites. David at this time left the court of Saul to go home and feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. His 3 eldest brothers were in the army of Saul. Now Jesse said to David, his son, "Take a measure of this parched grain and these 10 loaves for your brothers, and run to your brothers' camp. Take these 10 cheeses to the captain of their group, and see how your brothers are faring." David rose early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper, and departed as Jesse had commanded him. He came to the battle line just as the army was going out to fight, shouting the battle cry, for Israel and the Philistines had put the army in battle array against the army. David left his baggage in the hands of the keeper of the baggage and ran among the army. He came up to his brothers and saluted them. As he talked with them, there appeared the champion Goliath out of the armies of the Philistines, and he made his challenge, and David heard it. All the men of Israel, when they saw the men, fled from him and were very much afraid. "Have you seen this man who came?" The man of Israel said, "He has come up to challenge Israel, and to the man who can kill him, the king will give great riches, and he will give him his daughter in marriage, and will make his father's house free in Israel." And David spoke to the men who stood near him, saying, "Who is this heathen Philistine, that he should challenge the armies of the living God?" Eliab, his eldest brother, heard him speaking to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, "Why did you come down here? With whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the wickedness of your heart, for you have come down just so that you might see the battle." David said, "What have I now done? Is there not a reason?" He turned from him toward another man and spoke to him in the same way, and the people spoke again of the reward. And when the people heard the words which David spoke, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for the boy. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart be troubled because of Goliath. I, your servant, will go and fight with the Philistine." Saul said, "You are not able to go out and fight with this Philistine, for you are but a boy, and he has been a man of war since his youth." David said to Saul, "Your servant kept his father's sheep, and a lion came, and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. I gave chase, and it struck the lion down, and rescued it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and struck him and killed him. Your servant killed both the lion and the bear, and this heathen Philistine will be as one of them." seeing that he has challenged the armies of the living God. Moreover, David said, "The Lord, who saved me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will save me from the hand of this Philistine." Then Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Saul armed David with his armor, and he put a helmet of brass on his head, and clothed him in a coat of mail. And David fastened Saul's sword upon his armor, and tried to walk, in order to test the armor. But finding he could not, he said to Saul, "I cannot fight with these, for I am not used to them." Saul's pieces of armor were too heavy and cumbersome, so he undid them and took them off. He took his staff in his hand, and bent it down, chose 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag, which he carried with him. With his sling in his hand, he drew near to the giant Philistine, who waited. The Philistine came on, and drew near to David, and the shield-bearer went before him. But when the Philistine looked and saw David, he despised him, for he was but a boy, fine and fair of face. The Philistine said to David, "I am a dog, that you come to fight me with sticks." And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the fowls of the air, and to the beasts of the field." And David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the army of Israel, whom you have challenged. This day the Lord will put you into my hands, and I will strike you down and take your head from you, and I will give the bodies of the army of the Philistines to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And everyone gathered there will know that the Lord saves not the sword and the spear, but the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." Then the Philistine arose and came nearer to meet David. David hurried and ran toward the army of the Philistine, and he put his hand into his bag, took out a stone, and slung it, and hit the Philistine in the forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell upon his face on the earth. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and struck down the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in David's hand. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, and taking Goliath's sword, cut off his head, killed him. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled, and the men of Israel arose, shouting, and pursued the Philistines all the way to the valley, to the gates of Ekron. The Philistines who were wounded fell down by the road to Shaaraim, as far as Gath and Ekron. Then the children of Israel came back from chasing the Philistines, and pillaged their tents. And David took the head of the Philistine, and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put the armor in his own tent. And when Saul had seen David going forth against Goliath, he had said to Abner, his general, "Abner, whose son is this youth?" Abner said, "Upon my word, O king, I do not know." The king said, "Find out who this stripling's father." And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, with Goliath's head in his hand. And Saul said, "Whose son are you, young man?" David said, "I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite." Saul took David home that day, and would not let him go back to his father's house. He sent him over to his men of war, and the people and the palace servants accepted him. Jonathan, Saul's son, came to love David as his own brother, and they made a covenant of friendship. But as David was returning from the slaughter the Philistines, the women came out of the cities of Israel, singing and dancing, to meet King Saul, with tabrets and other musical instruments. And the women sang to each other as they played and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. This much displeased Saul, and he said, If they reckon that David is 10 times better than I, he will soon want to have the kingdom for himself. And from this time forward, Saul eyed David with suspicion. The next day, David was playing his harp, as before, and an evil spirit came upon Saul, and he picked up a javelin and threw it at David, saying, I will pin David to the wall with it. David avoided the point of the javelin, and Saul was more than ever afraid of him, for he knew that the Lord was with David, and no longer with him. But David behaved very wisely in all his ways, and all Israel loved and trusted him. Then Saul said to David, Here is my elder daughter, Merab. I will give her to you as your wife, if you will fight my battles for me. For Saul did not want to kill David with his own hand, and he hoped that he would fall in battle with the Philistines. David said, Who am I, and what is my family, that I should be the king's son-in-law? But at the time that Merab should have been given to David, instead Saul married her to Adriel, the Methlabite. But at the time that Merab should have been given to David, instead Saul married her to Adriel, the Methlabite. But it happened that Michal, Saul's younger daughter, also loved David, and when Saul was told of this, he was very pleased, thinking that through her love he might ensnare and destroy David. So he sent for David and told him, Today you will be my son-in-law, and marry the other of my daughters. To his servants he said, Take David aside and tell him privily that the king delights in him, and that all the people love him, and so it is fitting that he should be the king's son-in-law. But when he heard this, David said, I am too poor and insignificant to marry the king's daughter. The servants reported this to Saul, and he said, Tell David that the king does not wish for any dowry, only the death of 100 Philistines, to be avenged of the king's enemies. When David heard this, he was pleased, for he wanted very much to be the king's son-in-law. So he went forth with his men and slew 200 Philistines, and Saul gave him to Michal as his wife. But Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal loved him, and he was still more afraid of David, and still more his enemy. Saul spoke to Jonathan, his son, to all his servants, and ordered them to kill David. Jonathan went from his friend and said, My father Saul is trying to kill you, so I beg of you to go and hide yourself. Tomorrow morning I shall go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are, and I will talk to him about you, and whatever I learn I shall tell you. The next day Jonathan talked to Saul as he had promised, and told him what a great and good man David was, and urged his father not to stain his hands with innocent blood. Saul listened to Jonathan's words, and promised that David should not be slain. So Jonathan called David from his hiding place, and brought him before Saul, and for a time all was well. And when the Philistines went to war again, David fought against them and slew many of them. But again Saul was possessed by an evil spirit, sat with his javelin in his hand while David played the harp. Again he tried to kill David, and again David slipped out of the path of the javelin, and escaped from the palace. Saul's messengers. Saul sent messengers to his house to watch and slay him in the morning. And Michal, David's wife, said to her husband, "If you do not get away tonight, tomorrow you will be killed." So Michal let David down through a window, and then she made up the bed to look as though David were lying asleep in it. And when Saul sent his messengers to take David, she said, "He is ill." But Saul sent the messengers back to see David, saying, "Bring him up to me in his bed, and I shall slay him." When the messengers came in, they saw that there was no one in the bed. Saul said to Michal, "Why have you deceived me and helped my enemy escape?" Michal answered, "He said to me, 'Let me escape, otherwise I shall kill you.'" When David fled, he took refuge with Samuel in Naoth in Ramah. That is all for the story today. Come back to hear David and Jonathan and finish the story.